My name is Alejandro Reyes. For 15 years, I've navigated the skies, logging thousands of hours in the cockpit of various aircraft. At 37 years, I believed I had mastered the art of control. I've flown through localized storms that rattled the airframe to its bolts and landed in crosswinds that would make a bird stay on the ground. But what happened to me 11 days ago on April 9th shattered every concept I held about our reality and what is coming for the elders of our country. Before I go further, please tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. Subscribe and hit that bell because this isn't a story for entertainment. It is a desperate alert regarding April 25th through April 28th that every senior in America needs to hear right now. That Thursday afternoon began like a routine maintenance flight in a small, single-engine private plane. I was alone in the cockpit, cruising over a quiet, wooded stretch of the countryside just to keep my hours current and the engine warm. The sun was glinting off the wings like a sheet of polished silver. Everything was steady, routine, and within the margins. Then, without a second of warning, the engine coughed and simply died. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a sudden, heavy silence that is the most terrifying sound a pilot can hear. I tried to restart, but the propeller just windmilled uselessly. I was too low to glide to an airstrip. I felt the nose dip, and the controls went heavy as lead. I fought with everything I had, muscles straining against the yoke as I tried to guide the small craft toward a clearing that wouldn't become a graveyard. I remember the sound of the wind whistling past the windows and the sight of the pine trees rushing up to meet the fuselage. My last thought wasn't of the manual. It was a cry for mercy. The moment of impact felt like a sudden door slamming shut on the world. There was a sickening crunch of metal and breaking branches, a brief flash of white heat, and then total silence. But I didn't stay in the darkness. Almost instantly, I felt a sensation that was the opposite of crashing. I felt a lightness, a release, as if I had stepped out of a heavy suit of armor I didn't know I was wearing. I found myself rising above the trees, looking down at the wreckage of the small plane. It was crumpled among the branches, smoke drifting lazily from the engine compartment. I could see myself inside, slumped over the controls, my head resting against the side window. I felt no attachment to that body. I felt no pain. I only felt a strange, deep curiosity. The forest around the crash site began to change. The green of the needles became more vivid, more alive than anything I had seen on Earth. The air felt thick with a sense of peace that was so tangible I could almost taste it. I began to move upward, not by flying, but by wanting to be higher. The physical world started to blur and dissolve into a realm of light that was soft and welcoming. This wasn't the harsh light of a runway at night. This was a living radiance that seemed to breathe. And then I saw him. Meeting Jesus was the most honest moment of my existence. There was no hiding, no pretending, and no need for words at first. He stood in the center of a brilliance that felt like home. When I looked at him, I didn't see a distant, judging figure. I saw a man who looked like he knew every secret of my heart and loved me anyway. I felt a surge of unworthiness so strong I wanted to look away, but his eyes held me. They were the color of deep water and filled with a compassion that made my soul tremble. I fell to my knees, not out of command, but because my spirit recognized its creator. I felt a warmth wash over me that took away every regret, every mistake, and every fear I had ever harbored. "I am not a good man," I whispered, the words coming from the very bottom of my soul. I felt the need to be completely honest with him. I've lived for myself. I've focused on the sky and ignored the people on the ground. He walked toward me, and his movement was like a song. He reached out and touched my shoulder. The touch was more real than the metal of my plane or the wind in my face. It was a touch of pure life. "Alejandro," he said, and hearing my name in his voice was like hearing a melody I had forgotten. "Your journey is not over. I have brought you here to show you a horizon that is hidden from the eyes of the busy. You have watched the clouds to keep people safe. Now you must watch the hearts of my people." He turned me toward a vast, shimmering expanse that looked like the entire continent of America spread out under a spiritual lens. I could see the cities, the small towns, and the remote farms, but I wasn't seeing buildings. I was seeing the spirits of the people. Most were dim, flickering like candles in a drafty room, but some were glowing with a steady, quiet strength. "Look at the calendar of the heavens," Jesus said, his voice resonating with an authority that made the light around us pulse. April 25th through April 28th. These 4 days are a convergence point. While the world is shouting about politics, money, and war, I am preparing a quiet revolution. It will not start in the capitals or the cathedrals, It will start in the bedrooms, the kitchens, and the nursing homes of the elders. He gestured toward a small, white-painted house in a quiet neighborhood. I saw an elderly woman sitting at a kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked frail, her skin like wrinkled paper, her eyes tired from years of labor. She was thinking about her grandchildren, wondering if they would ever call. Suddenly, the vision shifted to the morning of April 25th. I watched as a pillar of light descended through the roof of that house. It didn't break anything, it just filled the room. The woman dropped her tea. Her face, which had been set in a mask of loneliness, suddenly transformed. An angel was standing in the corner of her kitchen, holding a scroll. As he read from it silently, I saw the woman's spirit begin to glow with a fierce, golden light. She wasn't just a grandmother anymore. She was a warrior. She stood up, her back straight, her eyes clear. She picked up her phone, but she didn't call her family. She called a woman she hadn't spoken to in 20 years, and she began to speak words of such power and truth that I saw the darkness over the other woman's house shatter like glass. "She has been forgotten by her city," Jesus said, his voice full of love. "But on April 25th, I will remind her that she is my ambassador. I will give her the words to heal the broken, and she will speak them from her kitchen chair." The vision moved to a large, sterile-looking building, a nursing home. I saw dozens of people in wheelchairs, some staring at televisions, others sleeping in the hallways. It felt heavy and sad. But on the morning of April 26th, I saw a wave of spiritual fire roll through the front doors. It didn't burn. It awakened. I saw an elderly man who hadn't spoken a word in 3 years suddenly look up. His eyes became sharp. He stood up from his wheelchair, walked over to a nurse who was struggling with her own private grief, and told her exactly what the Lord wanted her to know. I saw the nurse burst into tears, her heart being mended in an instant. "They think their work is finished," Jesus whispered. "But between April 25th and April 28th, I am giving them their most important assignment. I am turning the places of waiting into places of power." I saw hundreds of these visions. I saw a man in a retirement community in Florida walking along a path on April 27th. He was visited by a presence so holy that he fell to his knees on the grass. When he stood up, he had a vision of a local disaster that was about to happen. He didn't hesitate. He began to pray with such intensity that I saw the spiritual forces of darkness fleeing the area. He was standing in the gap for people who didn't even know his name. "Why the elders, Lord?" I asked, overwhelmed by the scale of what I was seeing. Jesus looked at me, and I saw the history of every life he had ever created in his gaze. "Because they have the one thing the young have thrown away," he said. "They have time to listen. They have lived through the storms, and they know that I am the only anchor. Between April 25th and April 28th, I am going to use their seasoned hearts to be the conduits of my grace. They will be the watchmen on the walls while the rest of the world sleeps." The light around us seemed to deepen, shifting from a bright radiance to a warm golden glow that felt like the late afternoon sun on a summer day. Jesus didn't move, but I felt the environment around us respond to his every thought. Being in his presence was like being at the center of the universe where everything finally made sense. As a pilot, I was used to checking my instruments, looking for certainty in numbers and dials. But here, the only certainty was the love standing in front of me. It was a weight, a force more powerful than any jet engine I had ever commanded. I looked at him, and I realized that my accident wasn't a tragedy. It was a rescue mission for my soul. "Alejandro," Jesus said, and his voice felt like a calm wind blowing through the cockpit after a long, turbulent flight. "Look further. See the details of what I am preparing. The world thinks the strength of a nation lies in its youth and its machines, but I am going to show them that the true power lies in the hearts that have stayed true the decades." The vision below us expanded, and I felt as if I were descending through the layers of the atmosphere, but instead of clouds, I was passing through the prayers of the saints. They looked like streams of light rising from the earth. We hovered over a small workshop in a backyard in the Midwest. I saw an elderly man, George, standing over a piece of wood. He was in his late 70s and his hands were gnarled with arthritis. He was frustrated, looking at a project he could no longer finish because his grip was failing. But as the date in the vision to April 25th, I saw a shimmer of light touch his fingers. It wasn't just that his pain left. It was as if his hands became instruments of a higher design. He didn't go back to the wood. Instead, he felt an irresistible urge to walk to the house next door. I saw him knock on the door of a young couple who were in the middle of a bitter argument, their marriage on the verge of breaking. George didn't give them a lecture. He simply took their hands in his, and I saw a visible wave of peace flow from him into them. The anger in the room didn't just fade, it vanished. He spoke a single sentence about the endurance of love, and those words landed in their hearts like seeds in fertile soil. His hands have crafted many things. Jesus whispered, "But on April 25th, I will use them to mend what is broken in the spirit. He is one of my hidden builders." We moved across the map to a quiet garden in the heart of the country. I saw an elderly woman, Martha, kneeling in the dirt on April 26th. She was tired, her breath coming in short bursts. She had spent her life teaching children, and now she felt like her voice was a ghost that no one heard. But as she leaned over her flowers, the ground beneath her began to glow. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, she wasn't seeing her garden anymore. She was seeing the spiritual state of every student she had ever taught. She saw a man in a high-rise office who was drowning in greed, and a woman in a hospital who had lost her faith. Martha began to pray, calling out their names. As she did, I saw streaks of light leaving her garden and hitting those people hundreds of miles away. The businessman stopped his meeting, feeling a sudden, unexplained conviction to be honest. The woman in the hospital felt a warmth in her chest and remembered a prayer she had learned as a child. Martha's garden had become a control tower for the heavens. "She thinks her influence ended when she retired," Jesus said, his eyes shining with a holy pride. "But on April 26th, I will show her that her prayers have more authority than any lesson she ever taught in a classroom. She is my watchman in the dirt." I was speechless. I saw dozens of these encounters happening simultaneously. I saw a group of elderly men in a small-town diner on April 27th. They were sitting in their usual booth, drinking coffee and talking about the past. They felt like the world had passed them by. But as the clock struck noon, a silence fell over the table. One by one, they began to receive visions of the young people in their town. The ones struggling with drugs, the ones who felt hopeless, the ones who were angry at the world. These men, who usually talked about sports or the weather, began to pray with a ferocity that shook the windows of the diner. People at the other tables stopped eating. The waitress dropped her tray as the presence of God filled the room. These retired men were being transformed into a spiritual strike force, interceding for a generation that had mocked them. They have the scars of life, Jesus told me, and those scars give them the right to speak into the pain of the young. Between April 25th and April 28th, I am turning their memories into a map for the lost. They will not speak from books. They will speak from the reality of my presence. The vision shifted to a hospital room on April 28th. I saw an elderly woman, Elizabeth, who was in the final stages of her life. Her family was gathered around her, weeping, thinking this was the end. But in the spiritual realm, she was the most vibrant person in the building. As the sun rose on April 28th, I saw an angel stand at the head of her bed. He touched her lips, and she began to speak in a language that no one in the room understood, yet everyone felt the meaning in their souls. She wasn't dying, she was being commissioned. She began to prophesy over her grandchildren, telling them things about their futures that would guide them for the rest of their lives. Her last breath became a trumpet blast for the kingdom. "The world fears the end," Jesus said, "but my faithful ones know it is only a change in altitude." On April 28th, many who are on the threshold of my house will be given the strength to turn back and give one final, powerful testimony that will save their entire bloodline. I watched as a retired history professor in a quiet library was suddenly overwhelmed by the Spirit on April 25th. He began to see the spiritual roots of the problems facing the nation. He realized that the answers weren't in the politics he had studied, but in the repentance he had neglected. He stood up and began to write, his pen moving with a speed that defied his age. What he wrote wasn't a textbook. It was a letter to the leaders of his community, filled with a wisdom that was so sharp, it would later be called a miracle. I saw a grandmother in a small apartment, her walls covered in photos of her family. On April 26th, she was visited by a light so intense she had to shield her eyes. The Lord showed her the faces of her great-grandchildren who hadn't even been born yet. He told her to pray for their protection and their purpose. She spent the next 3 days in a state of holy trance, her prayers weaving a safety net for a future she would never see with her physical eyes. "This is the great reversal," Jesus declared, and his voice echoed across the spiritual landscape of America. "The institutions have grown cold and the young have grown distracted, but I have a remnant. I have a group of seasoned warriors who have been refined by the years. Between April 25th and April 28th, I am pulling back the curtain. I am showing them that their lives were not just a series of random events, but a long preparation for this 4-day window." I saw a vision of a crowded city street on April 27th. A group of elderly women from a local church were walking to a lunch meeting. They looked ordinary, wearing their Sunday best and carrying their purses. But as they walked, I saw the spiritual atmosphere around them changing. It was like they were carrying an invisible shield. Every person they passed felt a sudden, sharp tug on their conscience. A man who was about to lie to his boss suddenly couldn't do it. A teenager who was about to steal something felt a wave of shame and put the item back. These women didn't say a word, but the presence of the Lord on them was so thick it was doing the work for them. "They have spent decades in my presence," Jesus said. "Now I am making that presence visible. They are my walking tabernacles." On April 28th, the final day of the window, I saw a spiritual convergence. I saw all these individual lights: the farmer, the librarian, the fisherman, the grandmother, starting to connect. It was like a giant web of light was being draped over the country. The prayers of the elders were forming a canopy of protection that the enemy couldn't penetrate. I saw the darkness, which had been so aggressive and loud, start to retreat into the shadows. It couldn't stand against the combined wisdom and power of those who had stayed faithful to the end. I looked at Jesus, my heart full of a hope I had never known. "Lord, will the world change after these 4 days?" His face became very serious, and he looked at me with an intensity that felt like fire. "The world will be given a choice, Alejandro. They will see the power of the Spirit moving through the ones they dismissed. They will see the miracles, the healings, and the wisdom. Some will repent and return to the ancient paths. Others will harden their hearts and call it a mystery they cannot solve. But for my people, these 4 days will be a marking point. They will know that I have not forgotten them. They will know that their silver years are their most golden years in my sight." I saw a vision of an old man in a veteran's home. He was sitting in a courtyard on April 25th, feeling forgotten. He had fought in wars and seen things no one should see. Suddenly, the Lord showed him that his true battle was just beginning. He saw the spiritual enemies attacking his grandchildren's generation. He stood up, picked up his cane as if it were a staff, and began to pace the courtyard, praying with the authority of a general. By April 28th, that veteran's home had become a house of intercession, with men in their 80s and 90s standing guard over the souls of the nation. "They know what it means to sacrifice," Jesus whispered. "That is why I can trust them with this power. They will not use it for themselves. They will use it for the ones who come after them." I felt the pull of the world again, the cold sensation of my physical life calling me back. But the visions were coming faster now, a beautiful torrent of light and life. I saw grandmothers in the south, grandfathers in the north, and elders in the west, all being activated by the same spirit. It was a symphony of faith that had been building for generations, and it was about to reach its crescendo between April 25th and April 28th. The transition from that glorious light back into my physical form was a violent, jarring shock. One moment I was suspended in a realm of infinite warmth and golden clarity, standing before the sovereign of the heights, and the next, I felt the crushing weight of my own broken body. It was like falling from 30,000 feet and slamming into a block of ice. I heard the frantic, rhythmic thumping of a machine and the sharp, urgent voices of people I couldn't see. The air felt thin and cold, and the smell of antiseptic and scorched earth replaced the fragrance of the heavenly garden. I felt a sharp needle bite into my skin, and the world of light vanished, replaced by the gray, sterile walls of a small-town emergency room. As the doctors worked on me, I could hear them shouting terms that didn't matter to me. They were talking about internal bleeding, spinal stability, and heart rates. But even as they fought to keep my earthly heart beating, the visions Jesus had shown me remained burned into my mind with the precision of a navigational chart. Every detail of those 4 days, April 25th through April 28th, was as clear a clear sky at dawn. I knew I couldn't stay in the darkness. I had to wake up. I had to tell them. It took every ounce of my will to open my eyes, and when I did, I saw the face of a young nurse who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She gasped when she saw me looking at her, because by every rule of physics and medicine she knew, I should have been a casualty of that wreckage. They kept me in the regional hospital for several days, running every test in the book. A specialist, a man who had seen thousands of accidents over 30 years, stood by my bed with a look of pure confusion. He told me that my survival was impossible. He said the impact force in that field should have destroyed me, yet here I was, healing at a rate that made no sense. I didn't try to explain the celestial light or the hands of the Lord. I just looked him in the eye and told him that I had a message to deliver. He looked at me with a mix of concern and wonder, but he couldn't argue with the results. I was walking within 48 hours. I was out of the hospital in 5 days, and since that moment, I have done nothing but prepare for what begins in just 5 days from now. Before I fully left that heavenly place, Jesus showed me more. He wanted me to see the sheer scope of what is coming for our elders. I saw a vision of a woman named Mary in a quiet nursing home in the Pacific Northwest on the morning of April 25th. She had been diagnosed with advanced memory loss, unable to recognize her own children for years. But as the sun rose on that Saturday, I saw a light that wasn't of this world fill her small room. It didn't just touch her mind, it reorganized it. I watched as Mary stood up, her eyes sparking with a divine intelligence. She walked into the common room and began to call out the staff and other residents by name, prophesying over their futures with a clarity that left the doctors speechless. She wasn't just better, she was a vessel of ancient wisdom. On April 26th, the vision shifted to a man named William in a crowded city park. He was 82, a retired postman who felt like the world had moved on without him. He was sitting on a bench, watching the young people rush by with their phones and their headphones, ignored by everyone. Suddenly, the spiritual atmosphere around him changed. It looked like a dome of gold had descended over his bench. A young man, full of anger and carrying a heavy burden of secret shame, happened to walk by. William didn't even have to stand up. He simply spoke the young man's name, a name he couldn't have known, and told him that he was forgiven. I saw the young man stop in his tracks, his knees buckling as he fell into the grass, weeping. William didn't give him a lecture. He gave him the presence of God. The young are running fast, but they don't know where they are going. Jesus told me as we watched, between April 25th and April 28th, I am giving the elders the power to be the anchors. They will stay still, and the world will be drawn to them because of the peace they carry. The vision for April 27th was even more intense. I saw a group of elderly women, names like Patricia, Helen, and Betty, gathered in a small basement of a church in a rural town. They were known as the prayer warriors, but they had grown discouraged because they felt their prayers were hitting a ceiling. On that Monday, I saw the ceiling vanish. The Spirit of the Lord came down like a rushing river. I saw these women, some with canes and some with oxygen tanks, begin to pray with a supernatural authority that shook the very ground. I saw spiritual chains breaking over their town. I saw families that had been divided by decades of bitterness suddenly picking up the phone to apologize. These women weren't just praying anymore. They were commanding the atmosphere, and the darkness had to flee. On the final day of the window, April 28th, I saw a vision of a man named Robert, a veteran living in a small apartment. He had been struggling with a sense of purposelessness, feeling like a relic of a forgotten era. But on that Tuesday, I saw an angel enter his room and hand him a spiritual sword. Robert didn't see the angel with his physical eyes at first, but he felt the weight of the mission. He walked out onto his balcony and began to pray for the leaders of the nation. I saw his prayers rising like white-hot bolts of lightning, hitting the seats of power in Washington, D.C. He wasn't a politician and he wasn't a lobbyist, but he was doing more to change the direction of the country in those few hours than all the speeches in the world could ever do. Jesus looked at me one last time before the visions faded. Alejandro, tell them that I have not saved them for the past. I have saved them for the now. The world says they are a sunset, but I say they are the dawn of a new move of my spirit. Between April 25th and April 28th, tell them to open their windows and their hearts. I am coming to visit my veterans. The reason this is so urgent is that the enemy has spent years trying to make our seniors feel useless. He has tried to convince them that they are a burden, that their minds are failing, and that their voices no longer matter. But Jesus told me that this is because the enemy is terrified of a senior who knows their authority. A young person has energy, but an elder has a history of faithfulness. When a person who has walked with God for 50 years speaks, the spiritual realm has to listen. Between April 25th and April 28th, that authority is being magnified 100-fold. I saw visions of grandfathers who had been mocked for their old-fashioned beliefs suddenly being sought out by their tech-savvy grandsons who were desperate for something real. I saw grandmothers whose simple prayers were healing diseases that the modern clinics couldn't touch. I saw a great reversal of wisdom. The world will look at these 4 days and see a mystery, but the faithful will see the hand of their Father. I want to speak directly to those of you who are in that silver season of life. You might be watching this from a hospital bed or a quiet apartment or a busy family home where you feel like you're just in the way. Hear me clearly. The King of Kings has not forgotten you. He hasn't put you on a shelf. He has been refining you for this specific window of time. April 20th, 26th, 27th, and 28th. These are your days. The Lord told me that your most fruitful season isn't behind you in your 20s or 30s. It is right in front of you. I was a pilot who thought I knew the limits of the world. I thought the horizon was just a line where the sky meets the earth. But after my accident 11 days ago, I know the horizon is where the physical meets the eternal. We are approaching a spiritual jump in altitude that this nation is not prepared for. The only ones who can guide us through the coming turbulence are the ones who have been through the storms before. Now, as I share this testimony with you today on April 20th, 2026, we stand just 5 days away from the most significant spiritual awakening in American history. The elderly saints across this nation are about to discover that their years of faithful service have been preparing them for this moment. Their greatest ministry begins in 120 hours. If you know a senior citizen, call them today. Tell them to prepare their hearts through prayer and fasting. Share this message with every elderly believer you know, because the Lord has saved the best wine for last, and the harvest is about to begin through the most unlikely hands. Thank you sincerely for remaining with us all the way through this testimony. If you are still here, it means this message resonated with your heart and stirred something within your spirit. We invite you now to take a simple action that can create a powerful ripple effect. Write a comment sharing where you are watching from so we can lift your nation up in prayer. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you never miss the life-changing messages and revelations we release each day. Above all, please share this video with at least 3 people you care about. Friends, relatives, and brothers and sisters in faith, because a single share can awaken a soul, restore hope, and guide a heart back toward God. May God's grace surround you, and may He continually guide your steps in truth, always. I'm truly grateful you chose to stay with me until this moment. If these words reached your heart, then this message was meant for you. Before you go, I ask you to write a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to lift up your nation in prayer. If this testimony spoke to you, join this community by subscribing and turning on notifications so you can walk with me through the next messages I'll be sharing. And please send this video to a few people you care about. A single share can awaken faith, restore courage, and lead someone one step closer to Christ.